satisfied, Mason?
Пойдем, ракета пошла.
No, not yet. Not until I see the body. How many times Steiner was at Rebirth Island? We had to kill Steiner. I wanted the same thing.
Ascension 7:15.
5 years ago,
So trusted you.
I lost 30,000 men. Blink of an eye. Just fucking watched.
We gotta get back and help our boys out!
We wanted Steiner alive! Why did you have to kill him?
The numbers were telling me to! It's how you win the wars! You bloody hell! Just Makarov know you! My name is Victor Resno, and I will have my revenge!
Let me make this perfectly clear. I call the shots.
It's time to wake up and drink the breast milk, sonny boy. There will be no more good cod.
Уберите это. See what you made me do.
There are 3 parts to any good story. The introduction.
Somebody, we've just been through hell. Okay, we just need...
Also known as the hook, the body, or to continue with the fishing analogy, the guts of the story. Storytelling can be messy, since there's usually a lot of information that you have to digest, especially if the genre is something like mystery or suspense.
A man chooses. A slave obeys.
And to conclude this section is, well, the conclusion. And to finish off the fishing analogy, it's like the cleanup, I guess?
That actually is pretty funny.
It's not just the games, but even the individual levels from Call of Duty follow this pattern. It's just on a more micro scale. Yet following this basic outline makes not a good story. It's really just an outline. I think a lot of people would probably agree that a lot of, I would say most of the modern COD games don't really hold up to the older ones. And to be fair, there are a lot of reasons for that. Activision, things like different talent, less emphasis on campaigns as of recent years, nostalgia. It's really just one thing after another. But I like to kind of attempt to point out what does work, at least in my case. What's left lacking that these more modern games feel worse by directly comparing 2 separate Call of Duty games that have prison breaks. Why? Well, overcoming the insurmountable odds of, breaking out of an unjust prison setting, it always makes for a good story, but more than anything else, it's just cool. Really more the latter of those 2 things, actually. I'm sure that you're curious, so in order not to stretch it out anymore, the 2 games are Call of Duty Black Ops, released in 2010, and Modern Warfare 1, number 2, released in 2019. So the plans to side-by-side the 2 missions, Vorkuta and, I think it was like taken or captured or imprisoned or something. This one right here. I'd like to think that I'm a relatively smart guy, but in all actuality, I'm probably in the ballpark of Antarctica levels of room temperature IQ. So in order to make my thought process easier to understand, I've set a couple of rules or guidelines for myself. Either way, this is just my plan for how to structure this video.
Number 1.
I'll attempt to make the comparisons as direct as possible, so intro to intro, conclusion to conclusion, or in regards to how specific events are handled, such as character introductions, deaths, or how important information is revealed, for example. I'll try to hit all of those in tandem, and I won't be going over every single little item, just the ones that I find the most crucial.
Number 2.
The plan's to start with the intro, follow it with the conclusion, and then leave the body of the 2 games for last. There's just so much meat to the 2 of them, it'll just be easier to leave it towards the end. There may be a few moments that technically are from the intro of one game or the conclusion of the other, but the goal is just to see how things are handled, and it doesn't really matter when these story beats are introduced, so I'm really just going to compare them whenever I feel like it. To define the intro, I'm going to plan on having it end with the acquisition of a weapon. There isn't really a good reason, but I see acquiring a weapon as 2 things. First off, a shift in gameplay. You go from hunted to hunter, stealth to action, and it's the start of a fighting chance. It's the real beginning of the possibility of this prison break succeeding. Funnily enough, actually, for both of the conclusions, near the end of the levels, there's a cutscene where you actually get saved by a different character. So, just to make things easier on myself, the conclusion's going to start with that cutscene, the gameplay after you get saved by the character, and then it ends with the fade to black.
Number 3.
Last but not least, the body's going to be everything in between that I feel like talking about, or deciding to go into more detail over. Again, I'm not going to hit everything, because analyzing every square of every level is going to be a lot, but it's just to kind of match story beats, or talk about things that I like or dislike. Last year I managed to get my hands on a console and a ton of older games that I missed throughout the years. Many of those games being Call of Duty games. You know, you go to GameStop or anywhere else and they're trying to get rid of stuff. You know, here's 5 games for, $5 each or whatever. So it was interesting getting to see how much some of these series that I haven't played in 10 plus years is just how much they've evolved, or in what maybe evolution evolved isn't the right word, but just seeing how much they've changed. It's just super interesting because these more modern games, like they'll just kind of take their time. They're a lot slower. Maybe slower isn't the right word for it. Methodical, spec op-y, something. There's just this difference between like Call of Duty and Rainbow Six Siege, for example, and these games just kind of feel more like the latter, at least in parts. I don't know. Maybe less run and gun, or... Well, anyway, I do take issue with a couple of things, and I'll get to it later, but the first one is the choices that you have to make regarding dialogue, and I've talked about that for like 20 minutes or more in a previous video, so I'm just going to skip that. Some of my other issues are pretty minor, or could be explained with my own misunderstandings, but we'll just hit those when they come up either way. There's certainly more... I guess you could say thought in modern COD. It's not always just nuts to butt action anymore. The first real memorable stealth section that I remember at least was all gillied up in COD 4. But it was pretty scripted. There's a lot more flexibility in these modern Call of Duty games with how to tackle these problems. Now, I know you're probably thinking, why even mention stealth? Neither Prison Escape has much of an emphasis on stealth, and that's correct. I'm just trying to highlight the difference in how COD has grown. Captive is a very slow and methodical level. It ramps up with tension over time. You start out by being interrogated by General Barkov. When the base suddenly gets raided by Price's gang, they then leave you alone in order to go off and defend it or do whatever they're going to do. You have to MacGyver your way out of your cell and figure out how to rescue your fellow prisoners. I really do like this whole section. It's pretty different, especially for somebody who kind of stopped in that Black Ops 2 Modern Warfare 3 section of time. It's slower and builds up organically. A very different way of storytelling that I hadn't really seen in these kind of games up till that point. I gotta say, I just kind of like the whole section. It's pretty different from what I'd seen up to this point. The only other, like, major different one in previous games that I can think of up to this point is in the original Modern Warfare or COD 4. I don't exactly remember, it's been a while since I've replayed it, but you're like an ambassador or something that's being brought for execution, and you're like sitting in the car, and all you can do is like look left and right. It's just different. It's pretty cool. Now, on the other hand, with Vorkuta, there's a short intro prior to the actual start of the level, and There's no need for any sort of slow, gradual reveal for setup, because the plan's immediately set into motion. You learn everything that you need to just in those few opening seconds. Well, maybe a little after that too, but you learn everything that you need to know right at the beginning. This allows for the rest of its run just to be absolute fucking balls to the wall and nuts to butts action. Any good Prison Break, story or not, has a plan. Modern Warfare 1 number 2 hides its plan from you for its grand reveal.
Tell me about Commander Karim and the failed message.
Who's Commander Karim?
I'm Karim.
We got your messages.
When I say hide, I mean they use intentional or unintentional misdirection. I mean, it feels like the intention was for the whole escape to seem planned that entire time, but it just feels more like a series of coincidences. Now, Price's attack on the base, it was obviously planned, but Farr's escape seemed to be one more of opportunism. You know, having that key given to you on top of everything else, it just feels like it's too much. I mean, that weapons locker key could have easily been lifted off of a guard, or you know, the first guard that you kill, instead of Hadir giving it to you, or even his dialogue being slightly changed. You know, I got the key you wanted, or just something like that. Like, why leave her in the dark about what the key does in the first place? I know that the guards were coming, but that wouldn't have stopped him from making some sort of, like, gun gesture or something. And of course, the in-game reason is that he doesn't know what the key is in the first place, but I mean, it's just all too convenient that it happened to be the weapons locker that was right there. I know it all probably feels kind of nitpicky, but it just doesn't feel like there was any sort of plan at all. It's just one lucky coincidence after another. Now, of course, at the end of the day, this is all for fun, but it just feels like something you'd see more in a kid's movie rather than a methodically thought-out story for adults or young teenagers in this case. It's Call of Duty. Kids are playing this. What the fuck am I talking about? Now, Black Ops 1, on the other hand, holy shit, do they get their plan right. And it all starts with
Step 1! Secure the keys! Now! We take Vorkuta!
You know, I don't know how long this is going to take me, but god damn it, I'm going to gush about this. I know a lot of other people have probably talked about this stuff before, but I want to talk about it anyway. Right at the beginning, the entire plan is laid out for you.
What is step 2? Ascend from darkness! 3! Rain fire! 4! Unleash the horde! 5! Skewer the winged beast! 6! Wield the fist of iron! 7! Raise hell!
That's the beauty of it, though. Even though you know the plan, you don't actually know the plan. A little bit later, Reznov says,
Months of planning, Mason. We will not pause. We will not falter. We will be free or die trying.
now it's a bit of a cop-out, but it's perfect because we know it. We know the plan. I mean, Mason knows it. Our character knows it, but we don't actually know the plan. We've been let in on the plan without actually knowing what the plan is. And this is perfect because they tell us everything that we need to know about this plan without actually knowing what it is. We have an idea of what to expect. I mean, the first two steps, pretty self-explanatory, right? By the time you start out and you hear them, it's clear that you're underground in a mine. So, take the keys from the guards, leave the mine. Step 1, secure the keys. Step 2, ascend from darkness. And maybe context clues, maybe that's not the best word for it, but I'm going to use it anyway. With these context clues, you understand that these steps are not just like chapters of some fairy tale or parts of a story or something. You understand that these prisoners, they've been talking to each other. They've been talking in code. It's a secret. They've been keeping this secret from the guards. They don't want them to catch on. It's obvious at this point. It world builds so much with just 8 little lines of dialogue. And moving on, what about Rain of Fire? Do they mean like, get guns and shoot the guards? Oh, okay, alright. a little more literal than I thought it would be, but it makes sense. You know, they've got a CIA operative and hundreds, if not thousands, of pissed off inmates, most likely each of them having military backgrounds, considering the environment. You know, I wouldn't know how to make this kind of stuff myself, but, you know, with months of planning and being able to squirrel away these resources, it's certainly possible. But what about steward the... Holy shit, okay. Well, again, time plus people plus planning, it all makes sense. But, how does... Alright, well damn. Wield a fist of iron. You know, the guards have probably used it before on the inmates. Makes sense that they'd know about it. I mean, these steps, they all make sense. The middle steps, they're vague enough that I don't think I would have guessed what most of these referred to, but... they managed to trick you into feeling like you're taking an active role rather than being pulled along, because you now know the plan. You know steps 1, steps 2, 3, all the way through 8. But guess who doesn't? The guards. They're totally left outside of everything. You're not, though. You've been told everything that you need to know before you know it, even though you know that you don't know it. Honestly, these steps are so good that there's a reason that they keep getting referenced later on.
Step 1. Secure the keys. Step 3. Rain fire. Step 5. Skewer the winged beast. Step 7. Raise hell. Step 8. Freedom.
So, up until the point where you get your pistol, there really isn't a lot to Vorkuta's escape. It's a pretty standard Call of Duty, follow an NPC as you receive, I don't know, what do you want to call it? Dialogue, backstory, lore, whatever you call it. So, all you have at this point is a shiv. A side note, by the way, both games do a really good job of starting with nothing and you slowly collect your arsenal. But I have to say, Black Ops 1 just does it much better, and I'll get into that in the next section. But as far as Modern Warfare 1 number 2 goes, it's much more interactive. As I mentioned earlier, after your interrogation, you're left to your own devices and need to MacGyver your way out of your cell. It's interesting because in my experience there hasn't been a lot of puzzle solving in Call of Duty games, at least the older ones anyway. Well, unless you're a member of the Zombies community. Fuck you, Gorod, you piece of shit. So as I mentioned before for Modern Warfare, it seems like Farah is very opportunistic, and that shows with how she acquires her weapon, by ambushing a guard. Opportunistic, again, is how I feel this whole prison break scenario feels. All of it's just an opportunity that was taken, not so much a plan, besides price and all that, but this just shows how scrappy and how able she is when it comes to handling herself. Now, Black Ops, on the other hand... This whole prison break in Black Ops is a little more reliant on your allies, and it's one of those points that I feel Modern Warfare just really kind of fails in, because escapes are something that should take a lot of planning. Everybody has to play out their part, even the nameless NPCs that are just running around and causing chaos. It could have easily been you who takes the guy down to get your pistol, giving you another badass moment, but this isn't a scene that makes Sergey look cool at the expense of Mason. It gives other people other things to do. You're just a cog in this, and I know that I complained earlier about how Hadir magically acquires the weapons locker key. You may want to think of this as, oh, you're working together sort of moment, but it wasn't like it was Hadir's mission to acquire that key. And I know it wasn't Sergey's mission to kill this guy either, that you get the pistol from, but it's a lot different than like some other random prisoner walking up to you and handing you this pistol and being like, look here, I found this, it's for you. Everybody does their part, and it feels like there's something for this massive conglomerate of prisoners to actually do. And on top of that, with so many prisoners running about, it feels like it's much more likely and much more understandable that things might slip through the cracks. I think of Modern Warfare's conclusion really beginning with the introduction of Price as you head off to save Hadir. There's a noticeable change as soon as he's introduced, as your group heads further into the building. It's not for long that this happens, but things get much less chaotic and more methodical. Obviously because Price's group is much better trained, really. It's almost jarring, though, going from these chaotic firefights to this slow, much more methodical encounter. And this is one of those moments where I know that Price saves you, and maybe the execution's a little off overall with how you get to this scene. But the fact that you go from these chaotic, jarring firefights to these slow encounters, there's just something about it that really sticks out to me. Now, with the end of Vorkuta, I think it actually is a little bit jarring, because it's hard to understand just how much time passes between when Reznov saves you from the tear gas to when you start the biking section of this. I don't really understand where you are relative to before the cutscene, or even what happens to all of the other prisoners. I'm assuming that you're the only two that make it. But then again, that's sort of the point. I mean, you get hit with tear gas. It's not like you're supposed to be the most oriented of people at that point. Nobody really should be at that point. But, 15 years later, I just wish that, for my own personal, curiosity, I just wish that they had mentioned if anybody else got out. I'm sure nobody did, and it was just you and Reznov. But you never know. I gotta admit, this entire biking section's pretty fucking awesome. And it leads up to the level's climax. So I'm going to move the goalpost for a second and say, even if we set ourselves after this biking section, even after the car turret, I think it ends on quite the high note. And you get one of the most memorable lines that my friends and I still quote sometimes to this day.
Your turn! Come on! Step 8, Reznov! Freedom! From you, Mason! Not from me! Reznov!
So just a couple of quick little rapid-fire cool things that really don't fit anywhere else, but I just want to mention them anyway. The reloads in Modern Warfare 1 are a lot slower on this level, and it reflects how far at this point she's only ever held one gun before. It's honestly a miracle she knows how to reload. So it's just a cool detail that she kind of sucks. The other one being Reznov returning. It's just awesome. It's so cool seeing these characters return, especially because World at War, the one that he's originally from, you don't think that there would be any correlation, because most of these Call of Duty games previous to COD 3, they just had very loose, maybe some characters with the same name, but you don't even know if it's the same person. Yeah, I know. I wanted to talk about this again. It's just, it all feels too convenient. There's not a lot of time between you acquiring your pistol and freeing your allies, and arming them up, it just comes way too quickly afterwards. It all happens in the span of probably a minute when you acquire your pistol in the first place. And it's normal COD gameplay after that. We all know my feelings on this. I've talked about it several times, but there's so many other ways they could have done this. Why not pull a Sergei and have somebody break the weapons locker while you have to cover the door as guards try to come in, or something. There's 100 other ways that they could have done this, rather than, oh, hey, Hadir happened to find the weapons locker key for the locker that's right here in this room, about 5 feet away from where we were being held. It's just, Now, on the other hand, Black Ops does it right. It stretches things out a bit more. For the majority of the level, most of them aren't armed. You have to watch them get gunned down left and right. But the prisoners, they're like a tidal wave, just overtaking the guards from every direction. You get to see the makeshift weapons, the ingenuity, the sheer determination of these guys that are fighting tooth and nail for every inch as they follow the steps. Okay, so eventually you get to the arms locker where Sergei breaks down the door. And okay, so Sergei's a big guy, but it's a damn metal door. Just like the key being too unlikely, wouldn't Sergei knocking the door down be far too unlikely? I mean, we're gone for a decent amount of time while he's breaking it down. There's all kinds of stuff that could have happened in the meantime. This is a fucking Russian gulag where nothing is repaired properly. Other people show up, they've got weapons, and there's just enough left to our imagination, and they keep it vague enough where it all just makes sense. Now, if Reznov had him break down some random door and there happened to be a whole shit ton of weapons there, I think that would be more akin to The Key, but at least, like I said, everything was planned out. As I'm going over this, I realize that I keep kind of circling back to it. Maybe this is what I take the biggest issue with, but I want to end this by talking about our allies. There are 2 points that allies are introduced in Modern Warfare 1, number 2. There's Price's intro, which comes near the end of the level, and with that, the reveal that everything was planned out. They were coming, whether it was a distraction or a happy opportunity, whatever. You find out it was all basically planned from the beginning, or at least the attack on the compound. It gives a good explanation as to why there were so few guards, and the resistance that you do meet along the way was so weak, because the more heavily armed guards were probably defending the compound from the outside. I think it's kind of a shitty excuse myself, but whether they're fighting the outsiders or evacuating, it's whatever.
Helicopter! Gunboat! Cowards! Leaving! What do you expect from a spineless dog? Let's free the others from the warehouse before it's too late. On these sisters.
The other, more arguably important one is actually your jailbreak crew, since you spend the majority of the level with them. You have Modern Warfare 1, number 2 introducing its characters.
Farah, over here! Sisters, you escaped. I knew she would. Thank you, sir. Farah, come! The guns are here!
And then comparing it to Black Ops 1, it's underwhelming.
Allow me to introduce Sergei Kozin, the monster of Megadon.
I'm glad you're a friend, Sergey.
So even without weapons, the guy kicks ass, you know? But more importantly, it's the dozens of other people that are running around all the while. With just this one short scene, and even the lead up to this, where you're running through the tunnel, you know everything that you need to know. However, it's the opposite with Modern Warfare. We know that Farah and her brother were children when they were taken as prisoners in the first place. There's no explanation or hint of where anybody else comes from. It's fair to assume that they're not anything more than civilians, especially when they say stuff like this.
The guards are coming back. Quickly, we'll ambush them.
How? Point and shoot until they fall, like we said.
Like, there's always a level of suspension of disbelief, but it's stuff like this. It just feels like they want you to nod your head and agree with it, versus at least in previous games, there would be some justification for this stuff. Or they would, like, find a way to make it work, you know, like, hey, you've got 100 people, go fucking wild. It really does not instill confidence, and I think that if the group was much larger, or they were like, if you just had one other person like, hey, I'm gonna run over the other cell blocks in this building and let everybody else out, I think that would have been a much different story. But there's like 6 people. You know, they even say that the rest of the people are locked in the warehouse, but it's a miracle that your group manages to get as far as they actually do. It's such a small, untrained group that it's laughable thinking about how far they got against trained soldiers, nonetheless, who were in body armor. Now, if they had you crawling through the sewers again and your group was taking out, like, a couple of people here and there at a time and got into, like, one final firefight or something like that, but not through an entire compound, it just feels ridiculous. Like, the writing is... or like, if they were like, hey, we're going to let them take us because they don't realize that they're armed or something like that. And then you get to the warehouse, and then it's a firefight from there. That would have been a more interesting take on this. Now, Vorkuta has got... It fixes every problem that Modern Warfare had. It's a labor camp, and it's got people like Mason and Sergey and Reznov. It's so easy to fill in the blanks on who all of these other guys are. You know what? Reznov spells it out later for you when he gives his big speech about how Russia essentially threw them in here because they were afraid that the soldiers were tainted by the West at that point. So not only do you have extremely skilled prisoners who are physically fit from work in the mines all day, but you've got so many of them. Like, there's a reason that the step is Unleash the Horde.
Brave comrades of Vorkuta, the time has come to rise against our persecution. In the eyes of our leaders, we were already taken by the capitalist way.